Number 10. Jealous Sister. In 2019 in Russia, 22-year-old Elizaveta Dubrovina stabbed her sister, 17-year-old Stefania, somewhere around 189 times. She didn't just stab her, though. She intentionally pierced her vital organs and then gouged out her eyes and cut off her ear. But what drove Elizaveta to commit one of the most brutal knife attacks ever recorded? Elizaveta was apparently extremely jealous of her younger sister. Stefania was beautiful. She started modeling at a young age, and she even had an older boyfriend, over 20 years in fact, who loved her very much. Her jealousy boiled over. She went to the home of her sister's boyfriend and killed her while she was lying naked in bed fast asleep. When Elizaveta tried to flee, Stefania's boyfriend showed up at the right time, grabbed her, and kept her detained until police were able to arrive and take her to jail. Naturally, Elizaveta was found guilty of murder. She was given a sentence of 13 years in a penal colony in Russia, although she was first sent to compulsory psychiatric treatment because she's clearly insane. It took a year of treatment, but she was finally deemed fit for trial, and now she's at the penal colony as punishment for her sins. Number 9. Sleepwalking. In 2021, 17-year-old Benjamin Elliott woke up in the middle of the night clutching a bloody knife in his hand. He turned on the bedroom light and saw his twin sister Megan's body covered in blood. He had stabbed her in the throat. Benjamin murdered his own sister while sleepwalking. At least this is Benjamin's defense. Benjamin claims that he wasn't even awake when he plunged a knife into Megan's throat. He has since been booked into Harris County Jail on charges of murder. He freely admitted that he stabbed her. However, he might not be lying about sleepwalking. Evidence shows that after he turned on the light, seeing what he had done, he immediately applied pressure to the wound and then called the police. The 911 operator walked him through how to perform CPR, and he continued to do so until paramedics arrived. But here's the thing, Benjamin has no history of sleep disorders. He wasn't on drugs or under the influence of alcohol, and he hasn't sleepwalked since. He and Megan had always had a good relationship, and it's unclear if Benjamin is mentally ill or if he had secretly always dreamt about killing his twin sister. Nobody knows if this was premeditated murder or a bizarre freak accident. Number 8. The Anti-VAXXER. In October 2021, Jeffrey Burnham killed his pharmacist brother in the name of vaccine conspiracies. According to documents taken straight from the court proceedings, Burnham's brother confronted Jeffrey about his radical ideas that the government is poisoning people with the COVID vaccines. This caused Jeffrey to fly off the deep end. He killed his brother, then he killed his sister-in-law, a woman he hardly knew, because he claimed that they were killing people by injecting them with the vaccines. To stop them from hurting more people, Jeffrey thought it was his duty to murder them. Jeffrey went to Ellicott City, where authorities believe he killed an elderly woman named Rebecca Reynolds and stole her car. He then drove the dead woman's car to his brother's house, walked in through the front door, and opened fire on his brother and sister-in-law, then stole his brother's Corvette. The authorities found both victims dead inside the house, and Jeffrey nowhere to be found. Police eventually tracked down Jeffrey Burnham to West Virginia, where he was arrested and extradited back to Maryland to face 3 counts of first-degree murder. And all because he was a nutjob who didn't trust the government and took his insane theories out on innocent people just doing their jobs. Do you believe any of the wild conspiracies about the COVID vaccine? Let us know in the comments below. Number 7. Twilight Killers. 14-year-olds Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham had an intense and toxic relationship. But Kim's mother, Elizabeth Edwards, was strictly against their young love. Instead of dating in secret like normal teenagers do, Kim and Lucas concocted a heinous plan to murder Kim's mother and her little sister Katie, and then commit suicide so no one could separate them again. On April 14, 2016, Lucas Markham brutally murdered Kim's mother and younger sister, who was only 13 at the time. After the massacre, Kim and Lucas bathed together, watched the movie Twilight, ate ice cream, and had sex. If Mary Nottingham, Kim's older half-sister, had been in the house that night, it's likely that she would have been murdered as well. But at the time, she was in Derby with her husband and children, and hearing of the relationship between Kim and Lucas from her mother during phone calls, Mary immediately knew that there was something off about the Lucas kid. Mary also revealed that before the murders, Kim had tried to kill herself and had to be rushed to the hospital. Elizabeth had to then put the entire family into counseling. Counseling did help the family in the beginning, with everyone closer to each other than ever before, but the peace didn't last until the arrival of Lucas. What makes this case even more bizarre is the fact that the police later reported that both Kim and Lucas were unbothered about the deaths of Elizabeth and Katie. During police evaluations, they found that neither of them suffered from any mental illnesses, but noted that Kim showed signs of personality disorder and she can't be properly diagnosed until she's of legal age. Psychologist Emma Kentley said, "They feel like the world is against them and it's almost like Romeo and Juliet, but in a very dark-sided manner." Speaking of the trial, Mary said that she'd felt sick looking at Kim, because Kim had had the audacity to smirk at her during the sentencing. The murderous young pair are currently serving their 6th year in prison, and will spend 16 more years behind bars before their release back into society. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham are among the youngest killers in the UK. Number 6. Deadly Birthday. In 2021, a frightened 8-year-old girl called the police after her father showed up uninvited to her birthday party and started shooting family members. The Brooklyn birthday bash turned into a gruesome bloodbath. What should have been a joyful celebration ended in carnage. Joseph McCrimmon interrupted his daughter's party with a loaded weapon. The only reason his youngest daughter is still alive is that she heard shouting and arguing, then a series of gunshots, and hid in the closet. When she finally came out, she found that her mom and 2 sisters had been brutally murdered. When the cops arrived at the scene of the crime, they found the little girl holding her sister's bloody cell phone in one hand and a stuffed pink unicorn in the other. Detectives are still trying to work out a motive. They interviewed family members and found out that the girl's parents had been involved in a romantic relationship going on for 20 years. Their relationship was described as extremely messy, though lots of people have messy relationships, and not all of them go on killing sprees because of it. Joseph McCrimmon was found to have a horrific past. Over 20 years ago, he was convicted of murdering a man in Long Island and was also the mastermind behind 2 separate bank robberies. He spent several years in jail for these crimes, but was eventually let out, only to murder again. It's especially tragic for the little girl who's now going to be traumatized for the rest of her life. Number 5. Dangerous Twins. Leandra and LeMay Matthews are killer twin sisters who ganged up on their brother in 2017 and murdered him. In a chilling confession made in 2019, Leandra Matthews told her mother that it had to be done. The girls had to get rid of Christian Matthews, who was only 17 years old at the time. The killing was done by strangulation. Christian was discovered unresponsive with a bruised neck in the basement of the house where he lived with his family, including his twin sisters. Leandra was the one who called the police, telling authorities that she and LeMay had been upstairs in a bedroom when they heard a struggle in the basement, but something was not adding up for the police. The cops soon caught up to Tizzy and Lipford, the boyfriend of Leandra. When they questioned him, he broke down and admitted that he was the one who actually strangled Christian. But he said it was all Leandra's idea. Christian had threatened to hurt both her and her daughter, and she thought the best course of action was murder. The police eventually found text messages from Leandra explaining how her boyfriend was supposed to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. As for the other sister, she technically didn't assist with the murder, but she did help cover it up. So, she was also held responsible. Number 4. The Dropout. 23-year-old Chandler Halderson is currently on trial for killing and dismembering his own parents in January of 2022. Imagine bringing a child into the world only to have them murder you and rip your body apart. His trial is still pending and was recently postponed because the jail he's in erupted with coronavirus. The charges he's looking at are first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and giving false information. The prosecution is claiming that Chandler killed his parents on July 1st, after his father found out that he had been lying about attending college. Chandler had supposedly been a student at Madison Area Technical College, working for SpaceX, American Family Insurance, and as a scuba diver. But in reality, Chandler had dropped out of school, didn't have a job, and his life was a complete mess. After his father found out that he'd been lying to everyone, they got in a heated argument. Chandler shot his father once, then dismembered and dumped him in a rural area. He allegedly did the same thing with his mother, except that he dumped her mutilated remains in the Wisconsin River. Chandler and his lawyers are denying all accusations. Chandler claims he has no idea what happened to his parents and that he definitely wasn't involved in their deaths, but there's really too much evidence against him. Number 3. McKenna Hilton. On October 30th, 2017, 17-year-old Savon Schmoose was sentenced to a minimum of 40 years in prison for strangling his half-sister McKenna Hilton to death. Savon and McKenna had lived together with their father David Schmoose in an apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was there he killed his own blood. Once he'd strangled McKenna, Schmoose, who was only 16 years old at the time, he took her body and dumped it into a wooded area a short distance away from their apartment. McKenna's body was later found by a dog walker the same day. A week later, Schmoose was charged with murder as an adult, and he appeared in court where even his lawyer could offer no explanation as to why Schmoose had committed such a senseless act. He did say that he was deeply remorseful though, but the court wasn't buying it. Neither was Stacy Hilton, McKenna's mother. Stacy stood before the court during the sentencing hearing and confronted Savin for his actions. He listened to her with a blank expression on his face as she tearfully bid goodbye to her deceased daughter. Stacy couldn't hide her fury when she openly stated that she hated Savin for what he did and that she'll never forgive him. As the court session was adjourned, Stacy shouted, "Rotten hell, Savin." There was never a motive released to the public as for why Savin killed his half-sister. Number 2. The inheritance. Barbara Burns took care of her sister Debbie their entire lives. Debbie was mentally disabled and couldn't survive on her own. When the sister's brother died in 1999, he left them over $350,000 as an inheritance. Barbara was supposed to make that money last a long time, and she totally could have. The sisters were living in a trailer together in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it's not like they had expensive bills. Debbie was quite fit mentally and just kept burning through the cash. Within 5 years, it was all gone. On the night of August 15, 2004, Barbara had a couple of cocktails, watched some TV, and then dealt with Debbie having one of her tantrum. Debbie screamed herself to sleep, and then Barbara took out a .38 caliber gun, shot her in the forehead. Barbara then wrapped up her sister's body in a shower curtain, rolled up the blanket, and left Debbie's body in her own bed as if she were sleeping. The next morning, Barbara went to work like nothing happened. For the next 6 weeks, Barbara lived a pretty disturbing life. To mask the odor of her sister's dead body, she cranked up the AC and filled the home with air fresheners. She didn't tell anyone what happened. 6 weeks after the murder, she got in her car one morning and never went back. Debbie's body wasn't discovered until a mortgage company came to repossess the trailer 8 months later. The police then had to hunt Barbara down. They found her working at 7-Eleven and living in a homeless shelter in Virginia Beach. Barbara was given 12 years in prison and released in February of 2018. She never gave a clear motive as to why she killed her sister. To Barbara, it was a mercy killing. The money was gone, and so too was any hope. Number 1. The homeless brother. A family feud at a popular cafe in Florida ended with a homeless man being brought up on charges of battery and assault. It happened in September 2020 on a Tuesday night. James Warren Vincent Jr., a homeless man, walked into his brother's cafe on Main Street in Wildwood. James had already been banned from the restaurant but came in anyway, asking his brother for food. James' brother said that if he would please wait patiently in the park across the street, he would bring him something to eat. He wasn't going to let his brother starve. So James went to wait in the park. His brother brought him a sandwich as promised, but by this time, James had worked himself into a wild frenzy. He became aggressive, threw the sandwich at his brother, then chased him across the street back to the cafe. The brother managed to lock the cafe door, at which point James pounded on them and screamed. James is a large fellow, over 6 feet or just under 2 meters tall and pretty well built. The patrons of the cafe were terrified as he kicked and slammed into the door, trying to break in as he practically foamed at the mouth. The situation only calmed down when the police got there and dragged James away. Number 7. Jessica Camilleri. In July 2019, residents in Sydney's St. Clair neighborhood were frightened by the screams and noise coming from one of the nearby homes. The property belonged to 57-year-old Rita Camilleri, who lived there with her daughter, 25-year-old Jessica Camilleri. Neighbors could clearly make out the two women getting into a loud and intense argument with one another. After hearing the intense screams, neighbors rushed into the home and found a horrific scene. They found the body of 57-year-old Rita Camilleri without a head. Jessica was not inside the home when they arrived. Instead, she was standing in a neighbor's driveway soaked in blood. Thankfully, she didn't try to escape. Rita Camilleri's missing head was later found in a trash can of the same driveway her daughter was waiting, covered with blood. To make things worse, a 4-year-old boy who's thought to be a relative of the Camilleris was rushed to the hospital from the scene after suffering a serious head injury. It is believed that he witnessed the murder incident. When police arrived, they said that the state the 57-year-old mother was in was as bad as it gets as far as the crime scene can go. When Jessica was arrested, her hands were wrapped in plastic by the police to protect the forensic evidence. She was later formally charged with the murder of her own mother and denied bail after medical evaluation was conducted. Jessica's legal team argued for her release on the grounds of mental health issues, but in March 2021, her mental health plea was rejected by the courts and she was sentenced to 21 years in a maximum security prison. In Australian courts, this is the most severe sentence that can be given, and even though the judge agreed that the defendant was obviously mentally ill, he believed the extreme nature of CAMILLERI's crimes called for no concessions to be made in her favor. Number 6. NATALIE MAHER. In October 2021, police in the Australian state of Tasmania found the body of 71-year-old Veronica Korstefijn dead in her bed. Her body had been lying there alone for weeks before anyone found it, and body cam footage from the discovery showed that there was a pillow placed right on top of Veronica's face. An autopsy also revealed that she showed many signs of struggling before death. Very quickly, a murder investigation started to look into who could have done such a horrible thing to a senior citizen in such a safe part of the country. The first person the police thought to call was Veronica's 48-year-old daughter, NATALIE MAHER, who lived with her in the house. They were surprised to find out that NATALIE had left the state a few weeks before, around the same time police believed the murder went down. They sent out an arrest warrant for NATALIE in Tasmania as well as her home state in Western Australia. There, she was arrested by local officers who found Veronica's cell phone with her. She could not explain why she had her mother's phone. More investigation showed that all of Veronica's money had been taken out of her bank account and transferred into NATALIE's accounts recently as well. NATALIE had come back to live with Veronica about 2 months before her death thanks to some financial issues. She claimed the death happened by accident after the two got into a heated argument about NATALIE's drinking problems, and that Veronica was accidentally killed while NATALIE was defending herself. But the judge noted the obvious power imbalance between the two as well as NATALIE's actions after her mom's death. The jury unanimously decided to convict NATALIE MAHER of first-degree murder of Veronica Korstefijn, and she was sentenced to 23 years behind bars in prison, but she will be eligible for parole after serving 13 years of the sentence. Number 5. Lisa Marie Kaplan. In September 2017, police entered a home in Palmerton, Pennsylvania after neighbors had called for a wellness check. Once they entered the property, they found the body of 71-year-old Sandra Marie Barnt. Her body was lying on the floor covered by a blanket, and once the officers removed it, they saw an arrow sticking out of her neck. Sandra shared the home with her 51-year-old daughter, Lisa Marie Kaplan, but when the police found the body, the house was completely empty with no one in sight. When the police asked the neighbors about what happened, they said that they didn't really hear any weird noises that day, but they did notice Lisa Kaplan walking in and out of the house with a shovel over the past few days. Lisa also had a pretty hefty criminal record before this incident even happened. Some of her crimes included identity theft and lying while under oath. After the initial investigation, police believed Sandra had been shot by a crossbow, and Lisa was their primary suspect. The detective managed to get their hands on the cell phone of Lisa's boyfriend and some messages she sent to him that showed her confessing to the crime. Lisa was found and arrested a few days later and was charged with the first-degree murder of her own mother, Sandra Marie Brandt. Her defense argued that Lisa had a long history of mental health problems that probably caused her to commit the crime. There was some truth to that, considering that while Lisa was waiting for trial in a Carbon County jail cell back in 2018, she was found dead by jail wardens. The police believe she may have taken her own life. What do you make of this case? Let us know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 4. Rachel Hudson. In 2013, a Thanksgiving weekend turned deadly for one family when Donald Hudson, a man from Chesapeake, Virginia, was out shopping for Black Friday when he received a call from his daughter, 19-year-old Rachel Hudson. During the conversation, Rachel confessed to killing her own mother, 58-year-old Susan Lee, while profusely apologizing to her father. Donald was skeptical at first, and when he said he didn't believe what she was saying, she sent him a photo with the proof. He saw a picture of his wife lying on the floor lifeless with bloodstains all around her. Apparently it happened because of an argument Rachel had with her mother the day before. They had been fighting for a while and it was having a serious impact on the family. During the argument, Susan said that Rachel was crazy, and this apparently caused Rachel to spiral out of control, go to her room, and dig out a shotgun. She had planned on taking her own life using the gun, but after thinking for a moment, she realized that she didn't want her mom to find the body, so she went down and shot her mother instead. After this, Rachel decided to text her dad for a final word before she carried through with the act, but her father managed to talk her out of taking her own life somehow. The grieving man then had to go through the pain of calling the police on his own child, and 19-year-old Rachel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. 2 years later, when Rachel was 21, she was convicted of the crime and sentenced to serve out 18 years in prison. The reduced sentence was likely thanks to the fact that Rachel was severely mentally ill at the time of the killing, and the fact that she had pleaded guilty, admitted openly to all of her crimes. She is expected to get released once she turns 39 years old and said that she deeply regrets her actions. Number 3. Cheyenne Jessie. In August 2015, 25-year-old Cheyenne Jessie dialed 911 to report that her 60-year-old daughter and her 50-year-old father, Mark Weekly, had disappeared. Cheyenne was pushed by her family members to report the missing persons case after they had not heard from her in 2 weeks. Detectives quickly came to the scene, and soon after, they called Cheyenne in for an investigation and questioning. Surprisingly enough, after being pressed about where she was, what she was doing, and making her go through every single small detail about her life over the past few days, Cheyenne cracked and confessed to straight up murdering her father and daughter. The prosecution soon started to build a case against Cheyenne Jessie. They claimed that she planned on killing her daughter because she was getting in the way of her romantic relationship with her new boyfriend, Matthew Monroe. Apparently, Monroe had been complaining about the child, who had behavioral issues, over the course of their relationship. The prosecution did not mention a motive for her father's killing, though, but it is assumed that the dad may have known about her plans or caught her while in the act. She was arrested immediately after confessing to the crimes and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution first sought the death penalty for Cheyenne, and if she had gotten it, she would have been the first woman in the state of Florida to ever receive such a punishment. Later, during her trial, Cheyenne said it wasn't her, but actually her boyfriend who carried out the murders. As for the initial confession, she said it was because she was afraid of what her boyfriend would do to her if she told the truth. Ultimately, the court did not buy the story, and, with the evidence presented by the prosecution, Cheyenne was sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Twilight Killer. In April 2016, 14-year-olds Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham became Britain's youngest pair of murderers. Their teenage romance started because they were both fans of the hit Twilight film series. Kim's mother was not a huge fan of her daughter's new boyfriend. She noticed that the boy had a short temper and did not respect her whenever he spoke with her. She had been plotting with some of her other children to get the young couple to break up, and needless to say, this didn't make Kim happy. Kim threatened to run away from home, among numerous other things, if they ever made her leave Lucas. Because of these drastic claims, she was taken to get a psychiatric evaluation by her mother, and they found no signs of mental illness. But Kim's relationship with her mom kept getting worse. At the same time, she noticed that her mother preferred her 13-year-old younger sister, Katie Edwards. Around October 2015, Kim vented out some of her frustrations about her mom to Lucas, who then suggested that they kill her mom to finally be free. After quite a bit of hesitation, Kim finally agreed, and from that point on, they spent every moment planning things out. On the night of April 13, 2016, Kim and Lucas attacked Kim's mother and sister while they were sleeping. Kim suffocated her mom with a pillow, while Lucas stabbed her in the neck multiple times. After this, Kim had a severe panic attack and asked Lucas to kill Katie as well, which he did in nearly exactly the same way. Neither of the kills were clean, and both victims suffered through agonizing pain for almost 10 minutes until they finally died. After this, the teenage lovers then turned on the TV, watched Twilight, and had sex on the same bed Kim's mother was killed in. In November 2016, both Kim and Lucas were convicted of the double homicide and sentenced to 20 years in prison. They were tried as adults for their gruesome crimes. Number 1. Sierra Halseth. In April 2021, 16-year-old Sierra Halseth and her 18-year-old boyfriend Aaron Guerrero were arrested in Salt Lake City, Utah in response to an arrest warrant sent out by the Las Vegas Police Department, where they were extradited to. The two were accused of murdering 45-year-old Daniel Halseth, who happened to be the father of one of the suspects. A few days earlier, Daniel's body was found completely burnt to a crisp inside the garage of his Las Vegas home. An investigation showed that Daniel had already been killed before being set on fire. There was evidence that the suspects had tried to dismember the victim before lighting the entire house on fire to hide the evidence. There were burn marks found all over the home. But it seems like the suspects were unsuccessful in their attempt at burning the house down, since only the garage holding Daniel's body was caught over in flames. An autopsy report confirmed that Daniel had been stabbed over 70 times all over his body and was mutilated beyond recognition before being burned. Surveillance camera footage showed Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero leaving the home shortly after the fire. Before the murder, Sierra and Aaron had been forbidden by their parents, who were divorced, from seeing each other since they discovered a plot by the young couple to rob them and move to Los Angeles with the money. The parents also contacted Guerrero's parents and agreed that their children should no longer see each other romantically. Police were able to track the couple to Salt Lake City, Utah, since they had stolen Daniel's debit card and his personal vehicle shortly after the murder. They were not very clever about hiding their trail though, and it didn't take long for the Salt Lake City Police Department to catch them. After being extradited to Las Vegas, the pair were formally charged with first-degree murder, arson, robbery with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit robbery, and 4 counts of fraudulent use of a credit or debit card. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty, and in May 2022, Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero were sentenced to life in prison after a guilty verdict.
Number 3. The Cats. Family relationships can be complicated. A lot of siblings barely get along, while others are best friends and remain super close up into adulthood. Some are even so closely bonded that they're willing to go to the extremes with each other. In August 2012, brother and sister duo Hayden and Abby Cat decided it'd be a good idea to try and rob a bank together. The siblings claim that their dad, 51-year-old Scott Cat, convinced them into teaming up with him for the heist. Everyone knows that if you're going to try and pull off a massive robbery, you should make some kind of attempt to hide your identity. Hayden and Scott's disguises of choice were painter uniforms. The two men walked into the Comerica Bank with their weapons already drawn. The location was about a mile or so from the apartment building they lived in. While her brother and father went inside the bank, Abby stayed in the parked car outside and prepared to be the getaway driver. In an interview with ABC's 2020, Hayden said that the second he stepped foot into the building, his adrenaline was pumping. He felt so amped up that he could barely feel anything at all. His dad walked towards the employee at the counter and demanded to be taken back to the vault. The 20-year-old remembers that his body was shaking so badly that the terrified worker had to grab the bag he was holding out of his hands in order to put the money in. After stealing about $50,000, they ran outside to Abby, who was still waiting for them in the car. While everything was happening inside, Abby said that she just wanted everything to be over already. During the drive away, her father yelled at her a few times, saying that she shouldn't drive too fast because it would look suspicious. A few months after the first successful robbery in October 2012, the Cats decided to rob another site, this time a credit union in Katy, Texas. Instead of the painter disguises, Hayden and Scott thought they should switch things up and wear construction vests instead, which they purchased from a Home Depot. After stealing another $50,000 from the credit union, police officers caught on to the Cats' trail. By using surveillance footage from the store they purchased the vests at, investigators pulled Scott's name off the card that was used. On November 9th of that year, all 3 of them were arrested. You may be wondering what led this family to a life of crime. While growing up, Hayden and Abby lost their mom to breast cancer. She died at only 32 years old, and her passing hit Scott pretty hard. For the most part, the siblings did well in school, and their dad was the president of their swim club. But not long after their mom died, Scott started drinking. Before they knew it, he was getting arrested left and right for DUIs, disorderly conduct, and more. He made a living as an engineer, but his kids had no idea that he was also robbing banks. There were a few times when Hayden found wads of $100 bills lying around in his dad's bedroom, but as a teen, he didn't really think twice about it. A few years passed, and the family decided to move from their home state of Oregon to Texas in order to get a clean slate. However, Scott's past soon caught up to him. Before long, he found himself asking his son to help him out. Then soon after, his 18-year-old daughter Abby. In an interview after everything happened, Abby said that she agreed to help with the robberies because she thought it was the only way she could protect her father and brother. After all, they were the only family she had left. Sheriff Nels, from the department who apprehended the Cats family, said that he believed the young girl was more of a victim in this. He's decided that he wanted to try and help Abby turn her life around by making sure she can live a decent life after serving time. Scott, the mastermind behind the robberies, was sentenced to serve 24 years in prison for his crimes. He claims his actions were a result of prolonged alcohol abuse and that he truly feels sorry for what he's done. Hayden was handed 10 years while Abby was given 5 for her role in the robberies. While what they did was in no way right, we can't help but sympathize at least a little bit for the Cat siblings. And now for number 2. But first, it's shout-out time! We wanted to give a huge thank you to S6N, 6F, G6D, and Play and Tricks for supporting this channel. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Badger fam. Number 2. The Allens. Most everyone has had times in their lives when they wished someone else didn't exist, but most people wouldn't take things any farther than a simple thought. What would it take for you to actually consider killing someone, though? Well, for a brother and sister from Indiana back in 2005, it was money. They weren't just going after any old rich person either. They wanted to kill two very specific wealthy elders, their grandparents. 29-year-old Kenneth Allen and his sister, 18-year-old Carrie Allen, teamed up to murder their relatives. At first, they went to their 53-year-old mother Sharon and asked if she wanted to work with them. To their surprise and disappointment, she refused. The siblings couldn't just let their mom walk around free after asking her to help them commit unspeakable crimes, so they killed her too. Kenneth allegedly stabbed her several times with a knife at their home in Noblesville, Indiana. Not long after, the Allen siblings asked their grandma, 75-year-old Betty Bradley, if she'd meet them at the same property. When she arrived, they took a flimsy plastic bag, placed it over the elderly woman's head, and suffocated her to death. Then the pair drove to their grandparents' house to go after their grandpa, 91-year-old Leander Lee Bailey. It's believed that Kenneth carried out the actual murders while Carrie helped stand watch. He supposedly killed his grandfather with a few swings of a hammer. It didn't take long for the truth behind the deaths to come out. The brother and sister duo planned to escape to Las Vegas by driving cross-country, but they ended up getting pulled over by police for speeding somewhere near St. Louis. And according to the officers, the siblings were acting strange. They seemed overly nervous, and when the cops asked them questions about what they were doing and where they were heading, they gave different answers. A quick search of their rental car's trunk revealed credit cards, cash, jewelry, bloody bedding, and the IDs of both Betty and Leander. At that point, there was really no way to talk themselves out of the situation, so they confessed to the murders. The officers who spoke with them said that Carrie admitted things without even being asked. She said, "I'm sorry. We killed my mom and my grandparents and buried them in the basement." A little while later, Kenneth also spoke up and told authorities what they did. Investigators searched the basement of Leander and Betty's home and found positive traces of human remains. They were contained inside a newly poured concrete floor. One of the grandparents' neighbors, Doug David, said that he saw the Allen siblings at the house sometime around Christmas. He hadn't seen his elderly neighbors for a few weeks by that point, so he thought that the visit seemed strange. His curiosity was piqued after noticing Kenneth carrying a jackhammer into the house, followed by Carrie running to the car just to grab a few large buckets with shovels. Doug found the siblings' behavior strange, and when he spoke to others in the neighborhood, they did too. According to him, many people thought they should call and check up on the older couple, but sadly, no one ever did. It's something they'll likely regret for a long time. With the tools Kenneth and Carrie brought in, they dismembered the victims' bodies before burying them and covering them with concrete. We mentioned that their motivation was money, but just how much money was it? What amount made them want to brutally kill some of their closest family members? The answer is $200,000. Their grandparents had this enormous sum sitting in their savings account, and the Allen siblings couldn't wait to get their hands on it. Charges brought against Kenneth and Carrie included 3 counts of murder, robbery, and conspiracy. While Kenneth was sentenced to life in prison with an additional 130 years and no parole, his sister received a bit of leniency. The judge took pity on her since Carrie suffered from multiple cognitive issues, had a low IQ, and was just 18 at the time of the murders. On top of all this, she was known to be terrified of her older brother, so it's possible that he coaxed her into helping him. These factors led the judge to give Carrie only 38 years in prison, and she'll be eligible for parole as early as 2024. However, prosecutors in the case initially wanted the younger sister to face up to 100 years. They argued that she had multiple opportunities to alert the police of their crimes, but didn't take any of them. If she was really coerced into participating, in a way, she's a victim herself. It's hard to wrap your mind around how anyone could be capable of killing their own family using such brutal methods. But everyone knows, money can make people do crazy things. Even though this tragedy happened almost 20 years ago, it still lingers in the minds of many. After all, how could you forget a story like this? Number 1. The Cummins. There's certain lines that should never be crossed. One is killing a person, and another is killing a disabled person. Unfortunately, 36-year-old Sabrina Cummins and her 26-year-old younger brother Kenneth didn't care about crossing boundaries. Apparently, Kenneth is a common name for a killer. Anyways, the Cummins siblings were charged with killing 63-year-old Thomas Horan in January 2014. Thomas was murdered inside his apartment at a senior citizens building. The victim lived there alone with about 40 other individuals in the complex as a whole. Despite living by himself, Thomas had a romantic partner named Margaret who lived not too far away in the south inner city of Dublin. The two had a daughter together, and she's now an adult working as a nurse in England. The victim had never had a sip of alcohol or smoked a cigarette a single time in his whole life. He lived with learning problems, and even though he was 63 years old, he was illiterate and never actually mastered reading and writing. It's believed that the siblings broke into Thomas's apartment to try and rob him. Sadly, the heist went sideways and ended in a gruesome murder. The victim's body was discovered inside his bedroom at around 4 a.m. When police first came to the scene, they thought that the elderly man had passed away from natural causes. This assumption was made because there was no evidence found indicating that a break-in had occurred. However, an autopsy and post-mortem examination conducted by the state pathologist Dr. Marie Cassidy revealed otherwise. The man suffered from a violent beating that resulted in his death. It's been reported that Sabrina kicked and punched Thomas, joining Kenneth, who was already beating the man. The two managed to break a few of the victim's ribs and also strangled him with a nearby belt. A detective on the case named Garda Brian Hunt eventually connected the Cummins siblings to the murder. DNA evidence, text messages, security camera footage, and more tied them to the scene of the crime at the time of Thomas's death. During his trial, Kenneth made an attempt to justify his actions. He claimed that Sabrina had previously told him before they got to the older man's apartment that Thomas had sexually abused not only her, but another one of their female relatives as well. Of course, no support for this outrageous claim was ever brought forward. If anything, it was likely just a desperate attempt to gather sympathy during the trial. One woman who will never feel sorry for the siblings is June Cummins, the killer's sister. This woman has suffered and gone through more loss than any person should ever experience in a single lifetime. She'd already lost her sister Breda not too long before the murders. And then, with the added stress of finding out Kenneth and Sabrina killed somebody, her mother died as well in 2015. June blames her twisted siblings for the death of their mom. She says that the horrible news right after losing Breda sent her into a health crisis, causing her to have a fatal heart attack at just 62 years old. Whatever amount of money the siblings thought they were going to get from robbing a defenseless elderly man was surely not worth the results of what happened. Despite being close enough to kill with each other, their bond couldn't have been that strong considering how Kenneth quickly tried to pin things on his older sister. Arguments could be made that the two were still reeling from the death of their sibling Breda, but that still wouldn't justify taking an innocent life. After being found guilty of the murder of Thomas Horan, Kenneth and Sabrina Cummins were both sentenced to life in prison. What's the craziest thing you've ever done with your siblings? Let us know down in the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification button if you'd like updates every time we post. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.